This podcast is with Johannes and Christoph, father and son, Germans, decided to start cycling from Germany to India and here on a podcast. I hope you enjoy.
Getting onto an airplane in one country, which is one cultural context, it's one environment that you've immersed yourself in.
Yeah.
And then you get off the airplane and people are different, customs are different. How does this transition take place?
How to trust strangers in a strange land. What's the total kilometer that you've been on the bike?
7,500.
Through Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and to China. And then via Tibet, we entered Nepal. And from there, we entered India.
We made it! And we did some shorter bike trips before, but never that long.
Sure. And I was asking about the permissions, like, has it been difficult for you to get across the borders? Please help us understand who you are, where you come from, and what really have you been up to in the last couple of months?
My name is Johannes Witte. I'm from Germany, from the northern part of Germany, from Brunswick. And I'm retired.
What about you?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having us on this podcast. Great honor to be here. And thank you very much for your interest in our story. So my name is Christoph. I'm the son of Johannes. For the last 5 months, we've been cycling from Germany to India.
Where in Germany do you start from?
My hometown and also my place of birth, actually, Braunschweig, Brunswick. And then our route or our journey took us through Germany, Czech Republic, Austria, and then along the Danube River through Central and Eastern Europe down to the Black Sea, where we took a ship across the Black Sea to Georgia, and then cycled through the desert along the Silk Road through Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and to China. And then via Tibet, we entered Nepal, and from there we entered India.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And what was this, like a dream project that you've been thinking about forever, or was it a random plan?
No, I think we started joking about it, that we should, at some point in time, we should go by bike from Germany to India. And we did some shorter bike trips before, but never that long.
Sure.
Yeah, and then at some point in time, Christophe called me and said, I've quit my job now. Are you ready? Let's go.
Suddenly one day he called you like that.
Right.
So the trip fits in the sense that we had been thinking about doing something like this for a number of years. And it just occurred to me after I quit my job, look, I can just get into an airplane, fly from Europe to Delhi or to Bangkok. And I think the one thing that always intrigued us, was you're sort of getting onto an airplane in one country, which is one cultural context. It's one sort of environment that you've immersed yourself in.
Yeah.
And then you get off the airplane and everything is fundamentally different. The weather is different, temperatures are different, people are different, customs are different. But what I think I was always very curious about is, how does this transition take place? So things need to change along the way gradually and sort of shift from a European context to a South Asian context. And what are all these cultures in between? What are all these landscapes in between that you
come across?
That you would need to traverse if you were to actually go by land. And so I think this is the one thing where all of a sudden it struck me. I was like, okay, I can once again get onto an airplane, but we've had this idea. My dad is retired, and I don't know when I will switch or when I will actually quit my job next.
Yeah.
So right now was a very opportune moment to actually plan this journey. And so I think I caught you slightly off guard when I gave you that call.
Slightly off guard.
But I was like, hey, we always had this idea. Why don't we turn it into an actual reality, and why don't we just do it now?
So what's the total kilometer that you've been on the bike?
7,500. Around that.
So you just called him up one day. And was it like an instant yes, or you took time?
I had planned the first half of the year with different trips with my friends. I was in Mexico beginning this year, in Italy and in other places. And I said, okay, for the second half, I will spend with my wife. And then Christophe called me and said, can we start in June? I said, yep, I first need to talk to my wife because that's not different from what we had planned. Yeah. So most of this year I spent somewhere, but not at home.
Wow. And then how did the route come about? Did you have it already?
No, I think there's different factors that you need to consider. I think there's obviously geopolitical considerations.
Oh, big one.
So we traveled through Central and Eastern Europe, following major rivers, especially the Danube, down to the Black Sea, crossed the Black Sea, Georgia, and then that was the one time where we actually had to get onto an airplane because in the north there's Russia, in the south there's Iran, and then Azerbaijan and Georgia actually, the land border is not open. So we were sort of stuck. So then at that point we had to get onto a plane, take a plane to Kazakhstan, and then from Kazakhstan we could just continue.
Then it was
Central Asia along the Silk Road, and then into Western China, Kashgar, which is also a Silk Road city. And then from there, we took a train to Tibet because once again, we couldn't enter Tibet from the west and then cycle or travel
but you could take
to
the train.
Lhasa.
Train was
We
okay.
could take the train around Tibet and then enter Tibet to reach Lhasa. And then from there, we continued.
From Lhasa, then you rode the bike.
We rode the bike to Kathmandu. I think that was the second time where we had to take a plane because there's only one road connecting Lhasa and Kathmandu, or rather there's one road that connects Tibet and Nepal.
Okay.
I think it's called the Highway of Friendship, was destroyed in a landslide.
That was the
And so
road.
we could reach, or we could get within like 120 kilometer reach or radius of Kathmandu, but then we actually had to turn around to Lhasa and take a plane to get to Kathmandu.
That's amazing. So considering that you've done the Silk route, the entire route, and the Himalayan borders, what was the most beautiful landscape that you remember? It could be different for both of you. But
Himalaya, of course. Last section before we entered China.
Yeah.
There was snowfall.
before you entered China,
Yeah.
what was it?
It was just high altitude already, up to 3,000 meters, and it had snowed a couple of days before, so all the mountains on the horizon, they were white. It was just blue, white, and landscape.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me in Europe, it was the Iron Gate, which is the Carpathian Mountains, where the Danube flows through the Carpathian Mountains, and there's an impressive canyon between Romania and Serbia.
Okay.
So that was beautiful. There's lots of castles built along the way because obviously, like back in the days, they tried to fortify that stretch of land because it was of strategic relevance. I think what impressed me also was in Central Asia, the desert, to just cycle for a couple of days through an open landscape where there's nothing. So that was quite impressive. And then set up the tent in the middle of nowhere and just sleep for the night. I think the Pamir Highway.
It was a long time that we saw the Milky Way clear on the
Clear
sky.
sky.
I think the Pamir Highway, what my dad just described in Kyrgyzstan, was really impressive. And then Tibet, obviously. Yeah.
Oh, Tibet is a dream.
Yes.
I know many Tibetans living in India who haven't been to Tibet. And was it tough physically, mentally? Was it at any point giving in to the physical stamina that it requires to cycle, or not really? It was smooth for both of you.
Not really. I had to get off the bike for a couple of days in the Himalaya. But beside of that, I think, no. We had always had a couple of days of time to recover, and then we went on.
Yeah.
I think there was never really the point where we said, let's stop,
Yeah. I don't
Never.
think so. No. I think the nice thing about cycling by bicycle is also if you want to take a break, you can take a break. You're not really running on a fixed schedule. So if you want to stay in a place for a day longer just because you feel tired, there's no one stopping you from doing that.
Yeah.
So I think that was quite nice. No, I mean, there were sections that were physically demanding. I mean, Europe was suffering under a heat wave. So especially when we were crossing the Iron Gate, we could see forest fires on the other side of the river. So it was hot. It was really hot in the 40s. So 42, 43 degrees Celsius.
40 degrees.
To ride like 8 hours, 9 hours in that heat.
Yeah. So that was...
That's not the temperature that you're used to. And then you're riding. So you're doing a physical workout in that heat.
Yeah.
So it required 7 to 8 liters of water per person per day. Really?
Yeah.
And where did you get your supply of water? That much?
You would always see signs of civilization. You were always on a road. There were always trucks passing by. So it was never super dangerous in the sense that, you could just end up somewhere completely alone and helpless. But there weren't any shops necessarily where you could stock up on water. So you had to buy it up front. And then you had to be aware of how much, what your water consumption was, how much you had left over. Yeah.
Did you have any apprehension, any fear before you started?
No, I think there was one section along the way where I think we were a bit nervous. I think that was Tibet, because we were a bit concerned about altitude sickness and what that would do. Part of the reason also why we got a bit nervous is because doctors in Germany or medical professionals in Germany, they're not used to high altitude. So they don't really know what's going on there and what the risks are.
Yeah.
And so they tend to be overly careful when it comes to traveling at high altitude.
Yeah.
I think the travel agency was really helpful. So we just called them and asked them, so how many emergency cases did you have where you actually had to evacuate people? And I think they had over 1,000 tourists. They're all adventurous, people who would go on a hike for several days or who would, I think cycling, not that many, but people would just go trekking. For example. Yeah. And they said, I think from among over 1,000 cases that they had over the course of this season, I think they had 2 emergency cases, and that gave us some confidence. I think the other thing that happens most of the time is that, from what I understand, and again, I'm not a medical professional myself, I think the brain cannot necessarily differentiate between short breath and panic or nervousness or anxiety. And so the connection goes both ways. If you're anxious, you're short of breath. If you're short of breath, your brain thinks that you're anxious. And so what they told us is that in the first couple of days when people arrive in Lhasa, for example, which already is at, I think, 3,200 meters altitude, if I'm not mistaken, and they suffer from short of breathness, they get anxious, and that's when they call off the trip. So it's not really an emergency per se. It's more... Panic. People just don't feel comfortable and they decide to leave rather than embark on the trip.
But high altitude is one part, heat is another, cold is another. So of course, in these 5 months, what all weathers have you experienced? Extreme heat, you said first, 40 degrees, which is quite a bit for you.
I mean, cycling through the desert obviously is incredibly dry. Also cycling at high altitudes in Tibet or also along the Pamir highway was quite dry. Cold, we didn't really experience...
Wasn't cold.
I think there was one day when we got caught in that storm, along the Pamir highway, where temperatures dropped rather quickly and dramatically. There was a storm.
Was for 1 or 2 hours.
So did you stop at the storm or you continued?
Well, we were wondering the entire day why all the farmers were actually bringing their horses and their sheep and their goats and their cattle downhill, down to lower altitudes. And we just thought they were preparing for the season. We weren't necessarily thinking that was like an imminent change in weather. And then we found out.
Then the storm made its presence felt.
Rather quickly, yes.
And we wanted to find the hotel that was not existing, so we had to ride back, and that's where the storm caught us.
So you continue to cycle.
We turned
in
around.
The storm.
We turned around and went a couple of kilometers back.
So your route is what you planned, right? And then some bookings, some travel bookings, some stay.
I mean,
what's the max?
Yeah, we had to book the journey or the trip in Tibet. So we had a bit of a tight deadline there, but we were actually ahead of schedule at some point. So we had, like, it wasn't necessarily that we had to push ourselves or that we had to skip certain sections of the journey to catch up, to make it on time. I think it's very difficult to plan things too much in advance because so many things can happen along the way, right? Like you can have a flat tire, you can have headwinds, and headwinds can have a massive impact on how much distance you can actually travel during a day. Just to give you an example, I think when we were in Kazakhstan, in the desert, we had tremendous headwinds one day and we wanted to cycle, I think, some 80 kilometers and we ended up cycling maybe some 45 or so.
Half of it.
But then at the same time, when we entered Slovakia, we had tremendous tailwinds and we were able to cycle at like 30, 35 kilometers an hour for 180 kilometers in just one day.
Zipped.
So typically what we would do is we would start, and then at some point in the early afternoon, we would sit down together and we would sort of discuss, okay, how much further do we want to go? And are there any places along the way where we know that there's a high chance of finding a hotel, or we could already look it up online and then book a hotel or just cycle there and then just ask.
That's incredible. I mean,
I think it's impossible to plan that up front.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
You may get ill or may have this
And
or that.
then that's another thing on your mind that, I have a booking there and I have to get there. It's unnecessary in the kind of mood that you're traveling. You don't want to have the pressure of a booking sitting for you. You rather just, you don't want to, of all the things that you've left behind, you don't want to be tied down to a hotel booking, I guess.
Right.
And I think also 2 to 3 weeks into the journey, you would miss every single booking just because you can't plan these things so much in advance. At some point you will...
or you put extra spare time in there so that you can make it in any case.
And that's the whole point. If you want to just enjoy a place, you would want to stay back more. Yeah.
That's what we did a couple of times that we stayed there. We said, do we want to continue tomorrow? Let's stay for another day.
And what did you discover about each other in this journey?
You want to hear that?
Yes.
I think we know each other pretty well already because I think there was nothing really where I said, wow, I hadn't expected that. Really not. Yeah. And all the rest is just between us.
That doesn't come out here.
I think the one thing that I realized where we're a bit different is after a really dusty day, I would just take my bags off the bicycle, put them in the corner and be like, I'm done for today. And you would look at your bags and be like, I cannot continue cycling with dirty bags. I have to clean them.
He would still be up for cleaning.
He would clean the bags. Sometimes he would clean the bicycle. So also when we arrived in Delhi, you arrived like a knight in shining armor and I was all dusty and...
Father and son. Anybody can make out.
But our bikes are still dirty.
Our bikes are still dirty, that's true. I think there were more things about the journey that took me by surprise and the way that I would react to these aspects of the journey. But not really anything interpersonal where I would say...
What were those things about the journey that surprised?
That you don't have to worry about where you sleep at night. You'll always find a place. I mean, I think there's never been a day where we didn't end up somewhere okay. And I think also, and this may sound slightly naive, but I think people are generally good. We've come across so many people who've been so nice, so welcoming, so helpful. And I think if you ask for help, almost everyone is willing to help you. And a lot of people will be more than happy to go out of their way to help you figure things out or find the next hotel or call someone up who may know something that you struggle to find out. And I think that has really surprised me.
In a couple of cases, even a car stopped by and said, where you want to go? And you have to take a detour here. Follow me, I'll guide you around, like that. Or we couldn't find a hotel because of Diwali. We couldn't find a hotel. So the one guy came to us and said, okay, I drive to the next hotel. The next hotel was closed as well. Then to the next hotel was closed as well. And then he said, okay, go to that hotel. If you don't find, if you can't find a place there, call me, I'll get you one.
Yeah. Where was this?
Things like that.
There was a small town just behind the border on the Indian side, the Indian-Nepali border. I would need to look up the name again. There've been so many places. I was just
thinking of the personality, but this looks like a very Indian Nepali personality of
but
hopping
we were
around.
Surprised on that.
But all along, you're saying this was an experience through the entire route. They were helpful people.
Yeah,
you never really had like trouble of sleeping, eating.
No. And I mean, most of the time we were just staying in hotels or we just set up our tent. But there have also been situations, I think one situation, the situation that really stuck out to me was when we were in Kazakhstan, we had this day where we had these tremendous headwinds and we just didn't make the progress that we had planned to make during that day. And it became more and more apparent that we wouldn't reach the hotel that we had looked up. We pretty much got stuck in this small town in the middle of oil field. Okay. And there wasn't any hotel. And at some point, people were just around us calling, making calls, trying to figure things out. And eventually they just said, walk over to the mosque, sit in front of the mosque and wait. Someone will come and pick you up. And then the Imam eventually showed up, led us into the mosque, led us into a room and was like, you can stay here for tonight. So I think, these are like the sort of situations that I think really impressed me. Like the degree of hospitality that or like the extent of hospitality that we experienced along the way, not just in one country, but pretty much in every country that we've traveled through.
So you're saying that when you planned the trip randomly, one fine day, and didn't really plan much for it, and you went with the flow and you had all the nice experiences, nothing much crazy stuff, so to say. And the trip is now finished. What are a couple of takeaways for you?
And I think changing your own mind on this, on having a fixed date to start, a fixed date to stop, and it can't take too long because normally all your planning is done, at least your vacation planning is done.
With a calendar.
And with 2, 3, maximum 4 weeks. And now all of a sudden 5 months is you have to mentally change.
Yeah, so your clock would be ticking, saying that it's already 4 weeks, we're away from home. And at some point you dropped it.
Right.
But an example of a trip like this is when you traveled many cultures, right? You crossed a lot of cultures. What stood out for you from cultural differences point of view?
What stood out?
Yeah, like culturally.
I think the uncompromising hospitality that we experienced in Central Asia, which was overwhelming at times. I mean, it was really, really nice. It was an amazing experience. But then when at some point when you have the 6th or 7th person stopping their car, slowing you down to then invite you over to their place to have dinner with them, then stay overnight, but not just for one night, but for several nights, please. And, here's my phone number. And I think when we got closer to Samarkand, people actually stopped their car to offer us money, which at a certain point got a bit much, like it got tiring. But I think... I think nevertheless it's impressive, like the degree of hospitality and friendliness. I think it's part of their culture.
Where was this?
That it started in Kazakhstan, then Uzbekistan, Tajikistan as well, Kyrgyzstan to a large extent as well. So Central Asia primarily.
They were like
but Eastern Europe already.
Eastern
times.
Europe as well.
Like you wouldn't ask them for a help, but they would just
They would stop and offer water and stay overnight, or have a tea with us, or have a meal with us. A couple of times we were invited to having a meal with them, up to the point where they obviously didn't have anything to hand out to us, so they offered us money. And I said, no, I don't want it. You better take it.
that.
Yeah, I think the big difference, hospitality in Central Asia goes a step further than it does in India in terms of intensity. But on the flip side, Indians they take no as an answer. Like they will maybe insist once or twice, but then at some point they realize, okay, like,
Let it be.
let it be. These people still need to cycle some 30, 40 kilometers. Sun is slowly setting. I better let them go. I think in Central Asia, it was more a matter of, I cannot let you go. You have to now come home with me. And that...
Did you make friends on the way?
We met people who we got along with really well. And there are some people who we're still in touch with. There were some locals who helped us out along the way, and they just gave us their contact details in case we needed any further help.
That's yeah.
But then in particular, I think when there were a couple of places where routes started to converge. So for example, when you travel through the desert in Uzbekistan, there's really just one road that leads from the east or from the west to the east of the country.
Yeah.
And it's at that point that a lot of cyclists actually start meeting each other along the way. And then sometimes there was one group, for example, of 6 cyclists. And I think there were 2 pairs that had started. And then there were 2 individual cyclists. And they met in Kazakhstan. And they decided to cycle all the way together because they got along really well. They cycled all the way together into to Kyrgyzstan. Similarly, along the way, we met a Franco-German couple that we got along with quite well. And so we cycled for part of the way, like along the Pamir highway to Kashgar, and then just stayed in Kashgar together for a couple of days. And then they continued their journey and we continued ours to Tibet.
Can you explain how to trust strangers in a strange land?
I think ultimately we're 2 men traveling, so there's a lot of concerns already that are not necessarily affecting us that might be affecting female travelers.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, that's
taken
one
off.
thing not to worry about. Fortunately for us, unfortunately, actually, that is a thing that anyone should really be concerned about.
Yeah.
And I think beyond that, like, what's the worst that can happen? I mean, okay, if they want to have our bicycles, ultimately, at the end of the day, if someone comes up to me with a weapon and demands my bicycle, I'm going to give him my bicycle. That's literally the worst that can happen. What other things? Really, maybe that's naive, but that's how I was thinking about it. Like, if someone wants my bag, if someone wants my cell phone, all right. I mean, take it.
Let it be.
So I just made sure that I backed up all my, that I backed up my phone, that I backed up my computer before we set off. And so there was really not much more to lose than the physical item. Yeah.
Well said. I think when you're on that trip, anyways, you're on your minimalist. You're not in a materialistic world at that time. And then if you're already prepared that this is maximum.
And I think there's also one thing that one of my friends told me, the one who had cycled in Central and I believe also South America. I think in most countries here in Asia, cycling is not a thing that you do during your leisure. It's quite unconventional.
Yeah.
And so if all of a sudden 2 Westerners are showing up on bicycles, that's something that most people already sort of struggle to make sense of.
Yeah.
So even if people have bad intentions, I think you sort of
soften them down.
Yeah, like you break that system. Like they can't compute like what is this all about? There's like 2 white people cycling here on bicycles.
So let's hold on to our bad intentions right now and just let's look at them first.
Exactly. And why are you doing this and why are you not flying and why are you not taking a train? Like, what is wrong with you?
We were even asked a couple of times.
Yeah.
Why the heck are you going by bicycle? You could take the plane, or you could take at least the
You
train.
don't have money? You don't... But do you have a problem? Your wife sent you on a bicycle?
You want some money?
People don't really know what to make of you in that situation. So even if they would otherwise have bad intentions,
But they're so confused
they're
about
confused.
you.
Exactly. You're confusing them to a point where they just let you go.
A person can take advantage if they understand you or they think they can understand you, but people are
If there would be
clueless.
people, they would look for cars or for motorbikes, but people on a bicycle going along there, what can you get
Crazy
from them?
people,
Crazy
yeah,
people anyway.
crazy
So
people.
you will only have trouble with them.
You just let go of the crazy people.
Right.
And I was asking about the permissions, like, has it been difficult for you to get across the borders?
No, it's not.
Did you have to plan ahead of time, or you just landed up there and you got the permit to cross?
I think we're very fortunate to hold German citizenship. So that means that within the European Union, we can travel as freely as we want to.
Yeah.
And then Germany has a lot of agreements with other countries in place that you can just enter the country without a visa for a certain number of days. And so there were only 3 countries really where we had to look into getting a visa. One was China, and that only because we were staying for more than 2 weeks, because you can actually enter China for up to 2 weeks right now as a German citizen.
Okay.
And because we wanted to travel in Tibet, and for that you require a special permit. Nepal, but that was visa on arrival. And then India. India was a bit tricky because there is a visa on arrival system, but it's only available at airports. Okay. And because we were entering via the land border, that was a bit tricky to figure out. But apart from that, we didn't need to concern ourselves with any visa application. So in that sense, we were actually really fortunate, very privileged, yes.
Yeah. That may be different for other nationalities sometimes.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
All right. Great. Is there any other plan that's coming up now, or you're going to Bangkok and you're going to Germany?
That's it for now.
That's it for now. Very, very, very inspiring. Absolutely very inspiring. And for me personally, what's the takeaway that I've taken is, again, like what you both reiterated, just do it.
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us.
Well, welcome. Too good. The most amazing part of this conversation for me was when he says that he didn't have to worry about sleeping at night anywhere, even though they didn't really have planned for most part of the stretch. Amazing. People are too good. Not just in one place or 2 places, everywhere. Such a large span. They covered 5 months. And of course, like Johannes said, that you can't really plan so much for a trip like this. Yes, it's a lesson for overthinkers and overplanners like me who would think that, okay, we have to sort out, we have to plan. Otherwise, yes, of course, we don't have to. Otherwise, of course, the adventure completely gets missed out and we remain in these buckets and we only experience what we want to experience. Such a pity. So lesson well learned. Thank you, guys. And this also reminds me and connects to the 2 people on our own podcast who live the very same life. So that's Hannah and Jacek, our friends who motorbiked from Poland to India. Well, there's something about India. I would like to say that. But nevertheless, it's the journey and it's the courage and it's the adventure and it's the die-hard curiosity of some people like that. So do listen to the podcast with Hannah and Jacek. The link is here. And then the other person that you must listen to is Anand Swaroop. So he is an ex-army man, but has been over the mountains, under the ocean all his life, personally, professionally. The backstory is out of his college days when from a town of Lucknow, he cycled and went from Shimla to Delhi. This would be like back in 35 years back. He also said that he found company. He found nice people across to help him out. So this, in times of today, when, we have fights, wars, geopolitical issues, and we all are feeling at war, but this is another reality. And that's beautiful. And as much as we must remember that there is tension between the countries, we must remember this part, because eventually the common man can any day outdo the few at the top. I feel so. I hope you enjoy these podcasts. Keep listening, keep flirting with a fish.